Welcome to this next segment of the AJC Virtual Global Forum 2020, a conversation with the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of the United Arab Emirates, Dr. Anwar Qurqash. I want to begin by thanking the distinguished minister not only for taking the time to share his insights with AJC and our many thousands of guests on this virtual platform, but for the multiple times that he and his colleagues in the leadership of the UAE have met with AJC over the 20 plus years that we have been regularly traveling to his country in pursuit of regional peace and cooperation and understanding, or meeting with government officials when they have visited the United States. Dr. Qurqash, it's very good to see you again. I also want to express to you, Minister, right up front, my and my AJC colleagues' appreciation for the constructive and candid relationships that we have enjoyed with your ambassador to the United States and fellow Minister of State, Yusuf Al-Otaiba, and with your ambassador to the United Nations, Lana Nusseibeh, the latter of whom, as you know, appeared on an AJC webinar just last month. For this rare, on the record, in fact, historic discussion with you, Dr. Qurqash, I'd like to pose a series of questions about your country and your very complicated and vital region, about your country's visionary leadership, about your hopes and expectations and concerns for the future. Before we get underway, though, allow me to formally welcome you to the 2020 AJC Global Forum. Thank you again for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you very much, Jason. Thank you. I'd like to begin by thanking you for hosting me today. And I trust that this will be an opportunity for a frank and constructive discussion, which is much needed. I want also to take the opportunity to thank the AJC for what has been quite a remarkable bridge to the region. There has been a lot of work that was done through numerous visits to all the countries of the region, to all the countries of the Gulf. And I think this sort of building an understanding where we agree that there are areas that can be connected, and then there are areas that there are differences, and what is the best way to try and bridge these differences. The AJC has been really remarkable in this, and I think the fruit of the AJC's work over this period has been quite impressive and substantive. So thank you very much for that.
Oh, thank you very much for those remarks, Dr. Qurqash. So let me pose the first question, related, as you would expect, to the public health and economic crises that your country and the entire planet are coping with. The UAE has established itself as a global transportation hub, conference venue, business incubator, and tourist destination, in addition, of course, to its vital role in the energy sector and in the regional security architecture. How have all of these aspects of your country's identity been affected by the coronavirus pandemic and the resultant lockdown? How are you coping with the ongoing threat? And what steps are you taking to return to normal life?
I always say that the UAE is one of the most global of any Middle Eastern country. And as a result, the UAE, by virtue of many of the things you mentioned, logistics, business environment, etc., benefits a lot when globalization works well, and also is affected when globalization suffers. So clearly, we were very much part and parcel of this, of addressing this issue of pandemic. I have to say that we benefited also from foresight. So clearly, I remember having a conversation with our national security advisor at the end of January, and I came to him about a certain regional issue, seeking direction on that issue. And basically, he told me, Anwar, I agree with you that we need to try and sort of navigate this particular issue, but we have a much bigger challenge on the horizon, and that's what's happening in China now. So this conversation was sometime at the end of January. So we started getting ready very, very early on, recognizing that our country, a country of, I would say about the size of the state of Michigan in terms of economy, in terms of population, etc., that this country of 10 million people will be one of many, many countries that will have to address what looks like a major, major threat in public health with a lot of repercussions. So I would say we were confronted with the same challenges that many other countries have confronted, but I would say that we also started getting ready and creating a sort of course of action very early, and that has helped us a lot.
The UAE has a proud tradition of philanthropy, including major charitable donations here in the United States. How has your country contributed to the global fight against the coronavirus pandemic? And what is your assessment of international cooperation in this fight generally? Closer to home, please talk about public health cooperation across the Middle East. How successful has it been? How can it be improved going forward? What specific role has the UAE played? And allow me to point out, by the way, that HAC published a column in the Arab Weekly toward the beginning of this pandemic, calling for greater public health cooperation across the region. And I note, by the way, that the UAE has twice in recent weeks sought to send medical aid to the Palestinians via Israel. Feel free to discuss that as well.
Yeah. Well, this is quite a wide question, so let me try and get a grip on it. I would say that I would actually agree with a lot of analysts who have said that our national responses have been more important than what I would call regional responses or global responses. Every country really has sort of looked into its own internal situation, and this raises a lot of issues really about global cooperation, regional cooperation on issues such as public health. So I would agree with that assessment. Having said that, I think the UAE has also recognized several things. I think that the issue of philanthropy is part and parcel of our overall foreign policy. We are one of the highest, if not the highest, in terms of GDP contribution when it comes to assisting other countries. So that is actually that is part of and parcel of our DNA, and it represents a large part of our policy. Now, having said that, also many countries in the COVID-19 challenge are not just looking for any help; they are also looking for COVID-specific help. So the idea is you have certain countries with resources, perhaps in many cases bigger than the UAE's resources, but perhaps because the UAE has gotten ready earlier, it was able actually to provide testing kits, it was able to provide PPE equipment, and so on and so forth. So that has been a large part of our policy. Now, if you look really at that policy, it's interesting because, in my opinion, we have come with a very, I would say, organized approach nationally, which has allowed us to actually come and try and help others in bilateral relations or regionally and otherwise. We've, I think, done something very successfully, which is separate the political from the humanitarian. So here, for example, we have no relationship with Israel, but at the same time, we have recognized that this is an area that we need to cooperate together because it is one that touches human beings, far away from their religions and affiliations and race and this and that. We've done the same thing, for example, with Syria. Although our relationship with Syria has been severed 10 years ago or so, we've also provided equipment, COVID-19 specific equipment to Syria. At the same time, our help has reached almost 70 countries currently. Again, almost protecting close to 1 million of health workers, because our specific, or a lot of our specific help is to try and protect health workers. It's not really about money. It is about something more important in a pandemic. It's about actually getting the correct equipment and correct protection for countries who can't really purchase it in this period. I think what has also helped all that is that we have built a lot of partnerships as of January, when we started tooling for the pandemic, in order to basically produce many of these things, such as masks and protection and testing kits and so on and so forth. So that's really given us a vantage point to be able to help, to be able to extend that sort of support. Today, for example, just to give you an example, we have crossed or are close to 2.5 million tests for a country of 10 million people, because our policy from day one was about testing and tracing and containing, with a clear focus that you can't come and, you need to get a right balance. You can't allow conditions to deteriorate where your economic health becomes a problem too. I mean, we are affected like everybody else, but I think this sort of approach of trying to keep the economy open as much as possible while addressing also public health has been quite a rational and logical approach for us.
Let's look at the long-term effects of the pandemic. The long lockdown, the widespread and deep economic disruptions, the kind of effect that they will have on regional stability and security. Not every country of the region has the kind of resources that the UAE does. You throw in the recent plunge in oil prices, and the crisis across the region really is amplified. Across the Gulf, Iran is dealing with a public health disaster on top of internal tensions and economic strains. Are you forecasting a regional power relationship restructuring, potential conflict between states, a spike in out-migration perhaps from the Gulf states, or do you see a softer landing after the pandemic? Does the UAE's regional role change?
I would say that things will change and things will stay the same. Okay, so in my opinion, definitely there'll be lessons learned. But in my opinion, a pandemic will not change what I would call the fundamentals of regional politics. I think we, thinking rationally, there will be some changes by various countries, but I think the most useful advice is to try and use the period post-pandemic to de-escalate tension. I think that is important, because I would say everybody will be affected. Iran will be affected, the Arab Gulf states will be affected, Israel will be affected, Turkey will be affected, everybody is going to be affected. Arab countries are going to be affected. So again, I think to suppose that fundamental issues that we have not been able to tackle for 40 and 50 and 60 years will suddenly, change overnight, I think is expecting too much, unfortunately. But at the same time, I think that we need to try and work at the edges of things. So clearly, I think we need to avoid rhetoric that leads to escalation. We need to avoid confrontation, because everybody will be affected in terms of demographics, in terms of economy, and so on and so forth. So clearly, if we can't really turn this area from a troubled region into an ideal region, which I think it'll be very difficult to see that sort of sea of change, at least let us work to make it a little bit more stable, a little bit more safe, a little bit more connected. So I would say that if our goals are reasonable, they will be goals that we can actually achieve. But if our expectation is of an 180-degree shift, then I think we'll be very disappointed.
Still, I take from what you're saying a hopeful message, and I think we all will welcome that, particularly in this very challenging time. But among the changes that we have seen in the Middle East in recent years, and you're alluding to that, and in fact, the UAE has played an important role, and you personally have played an important role in this change, is new thinking about Israel's place in the region. While your government has always been clear about its support for the Arab Peace Initiative and the creation of an independent Palestinian state, there have been visits to the UAE by Israeli government ministers. There is an Israeli mission in the UAE-based, Abu Dhabi-based International Renewable Energy Agency, and you and other officials have gone on record envisioning a future diplomatic relationship. What's the way forward to realizing that vision, and what obstacles, if any, lie in the way?
Well, again, I mean, if you let us look at the regional scene here, the reality is you have major countries that have normal diplomatic relations with Israel, including Turkey, including Egypt, including Jordan. You have other Arab countries such as Qatar and others that have, sort of led the way on having more normal relations with Israel. I think fundamentally is can I have a political disagreement with Israel, but at the same time try and bridge other areas of the relationship? I think I can. And I think this is fundamentally where we are. Today, we are, for example, facing a COVID-19 challenge. And if I am able, working with the UN and working with through the UN with Israel to try and bring support to the Palestinians, a very fragile health service, etc., then why not? How does that really affect my position vis-a-vis issues of the day, such as, for example, the proposed annexation? I think 60, 70 years of the relationship has shown that the full breakup of the relationship between Israel and the Arab countries has increased the animosity and built, in my opinion, a huge and deep gulf that could have been much easier to bridge, in my opinion. So clearly, the UAE today is part and parcel of the Arab consensus that basically looks at the solution as a two-state solution, for example. The UAE also wants to see continued Palestinian-Israeli negotiations. The UAE is clearly against any annexation as being proposed by the current Israeli government. Having said that, that is the political domain. Now, do I have to really look at all the other domains and make them basically almost, sort of static because of the political domain? I think we've tried that over many years as a group of Arab countries, and I don't think it has really led to what we want in terms of bringing stability to the region. So I think as we move forward, this is an important step. The first thing, as I said, the UAE is not trailblazing here. There are other countries in the Gulf, there are other countries in the Arab world, there are other countries in the Middle East that have done this. The UAE, as you said, is more global, so clearly more important in many aspects in any relationship. And I think, we can come to a point where we come to a given Israeli government, and Israeli politics is very complicated with a whole variety of opinions on where to move to the future. And we say we disagree with you on this, we don't think it's a good idea, but at the same time, there are areas such as COVID, technology, and other things that we can actually work together.
Let me drill down a little bit further on this point, Dr. Qarqash. This is enlightening and fascinating and really encouraging. you were widely quoted in March of last year when you were speaking at a conference at NYU Abu Dhabi. And you told an audience that the decades-long established position of most of the Arab world to isolate Israel was, quote, a very, very wrong mistake. You've just alluded to that thinking just a moment ago. You were saying that lines of communication should have been and should be kept open, but that there were growing doubts about the possibility of achieving a two-state solution. Do you hold the same views today that you did in March of 2019? And what was the reaction to your very candid observations of last year?
Well, I think I do hold the same views. I do hold the same views because practically we want to see a region that is more stable, a region that can resolve its issues over a negotiating table, that can resolve its issues diplomatically. And I look really over many years of Arab relations with Israel. Israel has been quite a tough negotiator. And many of, reading statements by many ministers, Egyptian ministers on negotiating with Israel, it hasn't really been an easy piece of cake for them. It's been very tough. But at the same time, you can clearly see that Egypt achieved many of its goals through negotiation, and at the same time has arrived at a solution that was started with President Sadat. So clearly, looking back at these two different episodes in Arab historical context of dealing with Israel, what we see today is we see that negotiations and having lines of communications open actually will yield better results for us and for the Israelis. And at the same time, a policy of rhetoric and policy of stonewalling and a policy of not actually opening these lines of communication has only radicalized the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. What was possible in 1948 became very difficult to achieve in 1967. What was possible in 1967 became very difficult to achieve in the 80s. And what's possible in the 80s is becoming more and more difficult to achieve today. So that is really a reading here. But on the other hand, I think it is essential also to look at the other part of our argument. The other part of our argument is connected to our values. We think that for an area, for a region, as in the Middle East, as in the Arab world, which should be much more tolerant with diversity, whether it is religious, linguistic, race, nationality, whatever, to reach that sort of acceptance of diversity, you need to open lines of communication. The idea of demonizing Arabs by radicals on the Israeli side, or the idea of demonizing Jews by radicals on the Arab side, I think has not helped anybody. So we do need to take that element out, and we need to come and say that we do have lines of communication and we disagree politically. We disagree politically because that is not the course of action that needs to be taken. But political disagreement also needs to be addressed, not with blatant rhetoric and so on and so forth. It needs to actually be addressed rationally, and I think this is the way forward. So from the UAE's perspective, this is about doing something in a way that the other option of trying to not communicate with Israel is proven that we just are not getting anywhere. The second side, of course, the creating an area of tolerance that we can all be part of, creating an area of stability, creating an area of economic also growth is, I think, is in everybody's interest.
Dr. Qurqash, before going on, I want to pick up on the tolerance theme. but just to say how refreshing it is and how exciting it is to have this conversation that we have had many times in private, in public. And thank you for taking that step with us today. The UAE in 2019 celebrated what it described as the Year of Tolerance, and the country has continued to pursue a range of projects and programs that highlight its commitment, your commitment to interfaith respect and coexistence. As part of that initiative, you announced last year a commitment to build the Abrahamic Family House, a complex that will include a mosque, a church, and a synagogue. In fact, the first new synagogue in the Gulf in many decades. And you've made a point of highlighting the presence of the small expatriate Jewish community, the Jewish community of the Emirates, with which AJC has been engaged for many years. What is driving your country's commitment to interfaith understanding? You just alluded to that in terms of the regional context, but what is the vision of your country's leadership in pursuing this objective, and how is the initiative perceived by the Emirati public and by your neighbors?
Yeah, well, Jason, I grew up in a small port, which is now the city of Dubai. And since I was a kid, we had a church here in Dubai. We had a Hindu temple in Dubai. We had a community of Hindus in Dubai. We had communities of Christians and others. So I don't really remember growing up in a one-faith town. So basically, this is really the country we come from. I mean, it's not like something we just found out that this is important. So that, I think, is the first thing. I think the second thing is the region also in the late 70s went through very traumatic experience, not the UAE, the whole Middle East region of religious extremism. And out of that religious extremism, we saw also acts of terrorism and countries facing the challenges. And the whole, I would say, narrative was sort of turned upside down in many ways. And 30 years down the road, it was very clear that the radicalization of the region and a small group of political Islamists claiming that they have really the true word on the narrative of Islam has brought disaster to the region. So this actually needed also a rectification. And I think this came out slowly. In the UAE's case, we went through the same sort of curve. It wasn't as severe, to be honest. It wasn't as severe because, as I said, the DNA of our society is a very tolerant DNA. But at the same time, I think through different things, we learned and we understood. We learned that the radicalization in the region has brought instability. We learned that the radicalization of the region is responsible also for the regression of the region. You never really had the sort of breakthrough that you got in Southeast Asia in our region, for example. A breakthrough on accepting others, on commerce, on investment, and so on and so forth. So clearly, all these things affected each other. And I think as we moved also forward, it was only logical that also the issue of tolerance, not only of things we were ready for, of tolerance with the Christians and Hindus and others, but also with the Jewish community. And you see that. And as you know, the Jewish communities in the region have had a long history, whether they are in Bahrain or whether they are in Iraq or whether in other areas over many, many years. And a lot of good research and books have been written about these. But as I said, you can clearly see that years of dealing with an issue in a certain way have not yielded results, then definitely there was something wrong in it. And you can come and say that without demonization of each other, we can still have our political differences, but carry on like any other region around the globe, where you have issues over territory, you have issues over identity, you have issues about religion, you have issues about a lot of other things that are quite difficult and complicated. So I think that this is something that the UAE sees as an important way forward, but at the same time understands that it is also in the scheme of how it sees the region.
By the way, in this broader context, I just want to celebrate the recent opening we just read about a couple of weeks ago of Ellie's Kosher Kitchen in Dubai. Just one more sign of the kind of mutual respect, coexistence, celebration of, frankly, of the presence of a growing Jewish community in the Emirates. It's really quite exciting. Expo 2020 Dubai, which had been scheduled to open this coming October, has now been rescheduled, of course, because of the coronavirus to October 2021. Among the 192 countries that were invited to participate in this World's Fair was Israel, which, with which, of course, as we've been discussing, does not have diplomatic relations with the UAE. How did the invitation to Israel fit into the larger mission and message of the Expo and of the UAE's approach to international affairs generally? And what role are you expecting the Expo to play in positioning the impact, the influence, the vision of the UAE?
Well, I think the Expo, in my opinion, takes on an added importance now, because it'll be one of the major events post-COVID. So from that perspective, I think a lot of people around the globe are looking for indications on how a post-COVID world will look like. And I think many people have quite what I would say dim views on how a post-COVID world looks, and there are many people who are more positive about that. I think Expo will give us an opportunity to actually project a post-COVID positive view, and many countries will actually will want to do that. The decision, in my opinion, of inviting Israel was the natural decision, because as I said today, in where we're going of trying to look at the region as a region of tolerance, a region of communicating with each other, a region of the future, a region of stability, a region of prosperity. You can't come and send all these messages and say, I'm not going to invite that single country, or I'm not going to invite those two countries, for example. It just doesn't work. So I think it was logical for us to invite Israel to Expo. And I think at the same time, this also has taken place as part and parcel of what I am, as I mentioned, of decoupling the political from the non-political. And I think this has taken years to do. And it hasn't only happened in the UAE, it's happened in many other countries around the region. So I would say that we are looking forward to a very successful Expo. We are looking forward to the most inclusive Expo in Expo's history. And at the same time, we are looking forward because it's going to be such a big affair with a lot of participation. So as I said, there is a new urgency for it. There is a new immediacy for the sort of positive message that the world wants to hear right after the end of COVID, hopefully.
Very good. By the way, AJC will be there. We wouldn't miss it.
All right. Okay. Well, AJC has always been positive about these things.
Thank you, Dr. Qurghash. A couple of more questions. U.S. policy in the Middle East, always a subject of debate, but it's likely to be an even more robust debate on U.S. policy this year in the run-up to our election in less than 5 months. I won't ask you to weigh in, of course, on individual candidates. I know you wouldn't, even if I asked you to. But I'd like to know the issues on which you will be especially focused as these debates in the United States play out. on the continued significant US military presence in the region, on the continued US effort to push back against Iranian aggression, on the future of, in fact, specifically of the Iran nuclear deal, the 2015 deal, on next steps by the US to promote Israeli-Palestinian peace. What are you watching most closely in the American election debate?
Well, again, I think for us, one of the, we've always looked at America as our main and most important strategic ally. So clearly, I think the first thing is we want to see an America engaged in the region. We feel that when America is engaged in the region is better, regardless of the various issues that you have mentioned. The debate about the future course of US policy actually precedes the current administration. As you know, there has been a debate for many, many years now with regards to America and its role in the world, and specifically America and its role in the Middle East. So I think from this perspective, for us, the first important thing is to keep America engaged in the region. Engaged does not mean that we want America to fight our wars. It doesn't mean that we want America to be involved in different altercations and so on and so forth. But sometimes people don't see except the political and military side of America. But I think American engagement here is way above that, more important than that. It is soft power, it is investment, it is trade, and at the same time, it is deterrent presence. The idea that an American presence is in itself helpful in terms of keeping the region stable, etc., keeping the sea lanes open, keeping the energy flowing, and so on and so forth. So for us, in our opinion, we understand the spectrum of different views between the two candidates. We understand the spectrum of views also between the two parties. And I don't really want to comment on those. But what is really important is to have our main ally, the United States, engaged, and for us to have a healthy discussion with Washington over its goals and over our also goals in the region. I don't think that any one of us wants America to be involved in a war. We don't really want to see any sort of war with Iran on our borders. But at the same time, we are also hoping that the Iranians will accept the calls for negotiation and will also address what I would say regional concerns about their policies. So I think the American presence is extremely important here. And for us, on many, many issues that you have mentioned, America has always been constructive. America has been a major player in the region since 1945. But of course, we understand also that the global international system is changing and the challenges are different. And from that perspective, I think the American presence here, the American engagement here is seen as something that is positive, not because we want America to get involved in yet another war, but we see it also as a pillar of stability, as a lot of the issues can be actually sorted out.
Dr. Qurgash, I think you know that AJC has long supported and will always continue to support American engagement in the region. It's a vital strategic interest of the United States on in so many dimensions. But let me come back to a point that you were just making toward the end of your response about Iran. In a conference on Gulf security 4 months ago at the prestigious Emirates Center for Strategic Studies and Research, I saw that you said that the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, was essentially dead now, and that there needed to be a new regional security framework focusing not just on Iran's nuclear threat, but on other aspects of Iranian aggression, including its missile program, its attempts to subvert neighboring states. you also called for a de-escalation of tensions. Let me ask, is Iran doing its part to de-escalate?
Well, again, I think with COVID-19, it's the rational thing to do. Everybody is going to be exhausted financially. Everybody is going to be exhausted in terms of sorting out their priorities. I think also this is an important element here. As I mentioned, we always thought that the 2015 deal was not best for the region. And I think this is still our conclusion on that, because we still see two areas that are completely out of the nuclear deal. If others are worried about the nuclear aspect, we are worried about the missile program, we are worried about the proxies and the interventions and so on and so forth. Now, to expect that Iran will completely shift, I think is unrealistic. But I think also at the same time, the call of de-escalation becomes here important. I mean, I have a major disagreement with your regional politics, but at the same time, it does not mean that my only tools is to seek confrontation or try and get others to be part of this confrontation. So clearly here, I'm seeing a lot of signals of calling Iran for negotiations here to try and understand that we do need to look at a new infrastructure, political infrastructure. Here, for example, we've always said 5+1++ is important. We were not part of the negotiations that led to the Iran nuclear deal. And as a result, I think an important voice and important concerns of the Arab Gulf states was not taken into account. And suddenly they were worried, and we were all worried, and we continue to be worried. So I think it is in Iran's benefit as well as the region's benefit to really open a new page in looking for a new regional structure here. And I think the call for negotiations to also include the missiles and to include the regional politics is something that is very rational. I would also come and say that I don't see this change overnight, but we do need to have a process. We need to have a process that will actually create a zone of prosperity and a zone of stability that Iran can be part of. So the idea is, do we still think that the 2015 deal was a bad deal? Yes. What should it include? It should include the missiles, and it should include the regional politics. So what is the incentive for Iran then? The incentive for Iran is to join in an area of stability and an area of prosperity. Is this realistic? I say right now it's very difficult, and it does need a process. But really, looking back over 30 years of very difficult relations, do we want to continue the same path? I think COVID-19 actually gives us an opportunity, not the UAE and Iran, but the region as a whole, to come and say, let's look at the things that we did wrong and let us try and address them with sort of fresh approach, because clearly going back to what we were doing wrong is going to just lead to the same conclusions.
That really ends our discussion on a hopeful note, Dr. Qurqash, and I want to thank you for that. We've covered a lot of ground in the course of this discussion. I want to thank you for addressing the HAC Global Forum and for your thoughtful, your candid observations, and more than anything, for the refreshing outlook that you and His Highness Sheikh Abdullah and the entire leadership of the UAE consistently bring to the challenges that confront the Middle East and the challenges that confront all of us who are dedicated to peace and progress in your region. We have always valued our exchanges with you and your colleagues. We are looking forward to a successful launch of your Mars mission, your unmanned mission to Mars, I think next month. And we look forward to our next visit to the UAE and our ongoing relationship with you, cooperation with you and your emissaries around the world.
In conclusion, I want to thank you. I want to thank the AJC, and I want to assure you that the UAE will continue on its path of moderation, on its path of prosperity, and on its path also of creating a very successful and forward-looking country in the region.
Thank you, Dr. Gargash.
Thank you.